Hello, this is Dr. Flight, and this is a video lecture that focuses on segmentation strategies. And really what we're going to look at are ways to approach markets from a broad perspective and how we can think about approaching market segments and approaching multiple market segments that makes sense for the firm and makes sense from a market-based perspective. So when we think about segmentation and the process of breaking up large generic markets, one of the big questions is, to what extent should we continue to break up the market and continue to segment the market over and over and over again? Every time we use a segmentation criteria, it has the effect of dividing up the markets into smaller and smaller and smaller segments. So what we essentially do is we move from a mass market concept or a generic market concept down to eventually, conceivably, a one-to-one perspective and do mass customization. So that is actually one of the goals that a lot of firms have, because when you begin to mass customize, you can begin to satisfy customers' needs on a one-to-one basis, which yields incredible customer satisfaction, of course. The problem is, if we can't do it from a technological standpoint, then the costs are insurmountable. The costs are too great to be able to provide every customer a unique value proposition. So that's a balancing act that companies and firms have, marketers in particular have today, being able to satisfy individual customer needs, but doing so economically. And so that's one of our drivers here, where we look at customer value and giving the customer everything that they need, and balancing what it means to be profitable in company value, and being able to move from what would be a mass strategy is actually going to be kind of high company value, because we have a lot of low costs in a mass market strategy, but low customer value. And what we want to be able to do is move in this direction, move upwards, where we get to a CRM type of environment where we're looking at different metrics and different measures to drive performance on an individual customer basis. And that's what we want to get to. So this is one of the challenges, and that's kind of where we're going with this. And so socially, from a social perspective, we're absolutely moving in the direction from a mass marketing environment to a micro marketing environment. But there's lots and lots of reasons why socially and culturally this is happening. We just happen to see a lot of the ramifications of the social shift happening in what we do from a market-based perspective and from a consumer-based perspective. We know that consumers want specifically something catered to them, like in their own media viewership and so forth. We know that they want to be unique. They don't necessarily, they want to not necessarily go with the crowd as they have in the past. Again, from a TV or media perspective, three networked television stations providing us all the media we can use on TV clearly is not what's wanted or needed. Same with magazines, advertisings, and different brands that we associate with. Having a niche brand, having a unique brand that's catered to a small group of consumers is oftentimes preferred over the big ubiquitous brand that's made for everybody. And so that's one of the realizations, or kind of the realities that we're facing now, is that consumers are far more attracted by the micro marketing concept than the mass marketing concept. However, we have to balance that in what meets the company's objectives and what we can balance from a cost perspective too. So different segmentation strategies exist, and if we think about um, moving again from mass marketing to some type of CRM environment where we're trying to cater to individual customer needs or mass customization, then we move from a mass market strategy at this end here down to the sub-segment strategy or individualized strategy, and we have a variety of different techniques to use as we move forward here. So we're going to talk about each of these in individually and talk about some of the nuances of these different categories. When we look at mass marketing, what we do is we think of the market as being fairly homogeneous, even though they're probably not. We kind of feel like customers are more or less very similar to each other, and that there's not a huge distinction between consumers in a general sense. Another case here may be that it's a brand new product or product category, and there haven't been enough product options made available yet to splinter the market or to divide the market up into segments yet. So it could be that the product market arena is just really new, and it's in the introduction stage at this particular point in time, and there just hasn't been time yet for there to be distinctions within the market that will emerge. The bottom line, though, is in a mass market environment, consumers' personal needs are not best met. The customer more or less just has to accept the product that's being offered, and that product that's being offered is the exact same for one customer as it is for everybody else. Now, from the firm's perspective, our unit costs are typically much less. They're much lower in a mass market environment because we're not creating lots of different advertisements. We're not creating lots of different products. We're not finding lots and lots of different ways to get the product to the customer. Everybody is more or less treated the same way. So from a cost perspective, the firm is certainly doing well to engage in a mass market strategy. The key here is that you have to have a product that everybody can more or less accept, and it helps if you don't have a whole lot of competition that's forcing you to differentiate your options, your products. There's the large segment market strategy. So this would be one where we choose a market segment, but this is a market segment that takes up a significant amount of market share. So it's one that if you could find a market segment that represents 50% or more of the total market, then that's considered a large market. We want to, though, focus on one core need that market segment has, and we want to identify the largest and most significant core need that the market segment has. So not these little tiny variations of needs and so forth, but find the biggest need that the largest group of consumers has, and we'll treat that like one large market segment. Again, we focus on efficiencies of scale in this sense, just like we would in a mass marketing arena, where efficiencies of scale are gained by large volume and very little differentiation or changes within my product to try to satisfy individual market needs. The multi-segment market strategy is one where we want to be the market share leader in a broader product market category. So we look to grow our volume, but we want to use multiple market segments that, if possible, to be able to grow that volume. So the market segments that we choose may not necessarily be similar to each other, But if we can, and so we might differentiate our products enough that each market that we look to satisfy is happy. So we're going to have some product differentiation involved, but if we have enough sales volume collectively, then that sales volume should counterbalance the additional costs that we have to incur by creating these new products. So this offers a option to create a value proposition, a unique value proposition or positioning statement for each of the segments that we enter into. This increases or adds value to customers, of course. So the product offerings could vary slightly then or vary a bit by segment. Each market segment then has its own positioning statement. Each market segment could be considered a separate strategic business unit. It may have its own manager or management system. It could be its own operating system, in other words, within the firm, even in terms of the firm structure and the firm hierarchy. So each market segment at this point could have its own marketing plan and approach to sell to that particular market segment. It'd probably be what it is. So that's a little bit different too than the mass market or the one large market segment approach that we just saw. Those two approaches, we'd use one marketing plan, for the entire product launch. In this case, we may have multiple market plans, each one catered to each market segment that we want to try to reach. So that would be a multi-segment market strategy. Similar multi-segment strategy or a variation of one would be an adjacent segment market strategy. In this case, we have two market segments. One may be our chosen preferred market segment, but there may be a second market segment that acts and behaves very similarly to our primary market segment. So generally here we have two market segments that exist, and they're different, they're distinct, yet they're similar in some way, which justifies us going into that second market segment with relative ease and as an extension. Basically, we're basically extending our product into a very close market that has consumers that are very similar to the market that we already serve. So by doing this, what we're doing is we're using a multi-segment market strategy, but we're finding cost efficiencies because the multiple segments we're going into are very similar to the ones we already serve. If we get to a point where we saturate or we completely penetrate our primary market segment, we may look for a secondary market segment to be able to enter into. We want to move into one that is very similar. So we want to be able to satisfy each of the adjacent market segments without huge costs of developing lots of new products or lots of new positioning statements. We want to try to be able to offer the same types of products to the adjacent market segments without incurring huge degrees of risks. So if two markets then are very similar to each other, then it would make sense for firms to be able to extend into adjacent market strategies or market segments. Illustrating this point is Toyota, as they have over the last 60, 70 years moved their car brands, developed car brands and vehicles, so small, efficient, good gas mileage, good quality vehicles from the 1950s through the Corona, the Corolla, Celica, the Camry, the Supra in the early 80s, then extending even further into Lexus, Avalon, and then Prius. So the Lexus and the Avalon types of cars are going to hit a different demographic. Yet if you think about it, if you're a Camry driver you may graduate to be a Lexus driver. Maybe as your income increases and your sophistication increases and so forth, you still want the quality, good quality, efficient, well-made type of car, gas-saving type of a car, but your needs probably change. And so what you want to do is transition the customer into a closely associated product that would be an adjacent market segment. So the Lexus buyer is not the same as a Camry buyer or a Corolla buyer or Celica buyer. And it's certainly not the Prius buyer either. The Prius buyer is certainly not going to be the same type of purchaser, but from Toyota's perspective, they see that these market segments are similar enough so that they can move their brand into those categories. And using a platform technique, many of the parts they use in one car, they can use in another car. So they can share parts across different brand platforms probably to share efficiencies of scale and so forth, and production costs go down by the number of units they sell and so forth. Okay, so that's the adjacent segment strategy. We also have the small and the niche market segment strategies. So when we look at small segments or niche segments, we're looking for segments that are extremely well defined, that are very clear in terms of what their needs are. Their needs may be outside the norm. These are not going to be very large volume market segments, but they'll be very reachable, they'll be very identifiable, and if your firm has the resources to match what they need, then you will possibly be able to step in and gain a huge amount of market share right away. So if we can go ahead and step in there and get into a it should be an A, shouldn't it be? If a single market has weak competitors, and the firm that you're in has a very good strategic fit with the market segment, then that makes sense. Remember that these are very loyal customers. In a niche or small market, they will be less price sensitive. They will be much more willing to pay for your brand at a price premium. So typically, even though your volume of sales will be smaller, your margins will be typically higher, and you're going to look for a very, very large market share in a niche or a small market, a small segment environment. If that's your strategy, then your goal is to be absolutely the best and the leader in that market segment that you can possibly be. The last one here that isn't always mentioned, but we do mention it today in the environment we live in, is a one-to-one or mass customization type of an environment. And in this sense, what we want to do is think of each individual customer as its own segment. So we're going to customize everything that we do for the customer. If you are in large sales in a B2B situation, you already do this. You create a customizable sales pitch, a custom price, a custom product. So this is nothing new for large-scale B2B sales. But for the B2C environment, this is very new here within the last 10 years or so, with digital technologies allowing us to do far more in a one-to-one customizable way. Clearly the downside here is that firms are going to incur more cost. It's going to be more expensive for companies to do this. So they're going to resist this unless it can be all automated and computer generated customization or something to that effect. And the more we can do that, the better this is. So new varied products have to be designed. New marketing, direct marketing is kind of the way to go with this. CRM, of course, drives this process. So the CRM and the relationships developed in customer relationship management is absolutely critical. Um, so those are the strategies. Those are the ways that we would go with that to buttress this notion of customer relationships and the marketing elements of it. Mass personalization, mass customization, being able to customize products to meet your market needs. Will ultimately lead to the one-to-one relationships that we have to have if we want to engage in a CRM program effectively. The last things that I want to leave with you in this discussion are some general strategies, and they don't necessarily fit any of the scope issues that we were talking about earlier. When we look at a market, we look at a market from a mass market perspective all the way to a one-to-one market perspective. And there are some older strategies that have been developed to describe some of the approaches that we take. So these aren't complete. I mean, these don't cover all of the different market scenarios that you could have. But if you're going to synthesize some different strategies or approaches, these could help formulate your ideas. So there's an idea called a depth strategy. And, if you have a large market segment, you would use this type of a strategy where you take products and you look to go into very large segments with them. Depth strategy is what we call this. So we use multiple product variations to serve a single market segment. This might be also thought of, sometimes we call this a product development strategy, where we develop products to try to reach the market segment that we want to try to reach. If we do this very, very aggressively, and if the market segment is smaller, then that would be something we would be doing with a small market segment or a niche market segment. Where we have lots of product variations that are thought to serve a one market segment at a time. Another approach would be a breadth strategy, and this is one where if we're using multiple segments or adjacent segments, where we take our products that we have and we look to serve multiple segments at a time with the one product, or the products that we have in place. So the products that we have in a breadth strategy would serve multiple market segments simultaneously. And again, with the adjacent market strategy, we would look for a lot of overlap between two market segments that are close to each other, and we would take our products and we would launch them into multiple segments using a breadth type of a strategy. The last strategy that we would have in place here would be called a tailored strategy. The tailored strategy is one where we use different products for different markets. So, again, a multi-segment type of an approach, but incurring the cost of two different product strategies in this case, different positioning strategies, and so forth. If we were super crazy and we did this approach many times, then we would start to approach mass customization, where we have a tailored product for each individual market segment, which might be defined as an individual. So a tailored strategy on steroids is a one-to-one type of an environment. Again, that's very rare. Typically, that's not what we'd see. But again, if we're using a multi-segment approach where we're having different products for different segments, then that would be a tailored type of a strategy. So that wraps up this discussion then. What we wanted to focus on was thinking about the scope issues associated with market segmentation, and some kind of a bigger or a broader overview of thinking about how we might want to use a strategy to choose which segments to go into, and kind of the scope or the depth of the market that we define. and whether we define it from a mass market perspective or something where we use targeted segments, so a targeted approach, a niche approach, a small market approach, or even a one-to-one marketing approach as well. Okay, so that will wrap up this section then on market segment strategies.